Muy buenos días, ahí veo que se van conectando. Digo nombres porque no puedo ver caras aún.
Good morning. I can see many of you are connecting. Good morning. Good morning in Colombia. Good afternoon in the rest of the world. Good evening. It's really great to be connected with you. Welcome to our second national consultation of the project. Restoring Hope in Colombia. My name is Cassandra Llosa. Some of you know me from the first session. I'm an analyst in the World Program for the Development of the UNDP. I'm based in Peru, so there's Latin blood today. I welcome you, and I also welcome Viviana Corso, who is our national consultant for this project in Colombia, she will be our co-facilitator. We will facilitate this project together. So, Liliana, you have the floor. Good morning. My name is Liliana Corso. I'm the national consultant for this project. It's really great to coordinate this, and really, it's so great to see so many well-known faces. This is a shared objective, that's restoration. Thank you, Liliana. Before starting on the reason for being together today, there are some housekeeping issues about connecting in Zoom. We are all familiar with it, but let's deal with this together. We have a simultaneous interpretation into English and into Spanish because some of the presentations will be in English. So we have interpreters, Adriana and Angie. Thanks for being there. How do we activate interpretation? On the lower part of your screen, you have a world, and once you click on it, you can choose. I will choose Spanish, and I will just stay on Spanish. So if you can give me your thumbs up, maybe someone who is listening in English can give me a thumbs up. I'm also trying to speak sort of a bit slowly. For us Latin people, it's difficult to speak slowly, but really it's important for interpretation not to rush. If you have any technical issue along the session, you can send a message, a private message to Marigo. You can see there her email. It's also copied on the chat. Try not to do it on the general chat, so as not to be diverted on the general chat. Our microphones will be muted because, well, we are too many people, and but anyway, we will all participate. After each presentation, there will be Q&A session. You'll be able to raise your hands. I can see the cameras, or you'll be able to write on the chat, and we'll try to answer all your questions. And we will also share on a folder. Marion will share the link with you on the chat, and will share all the presentations, the recordings, and the report of this session. I can see that we are 58 people connected today. I would like to have the introduction of each of you. It would be wonderful to have that possibility, but it would take really too long on this virtual session. So please, in the chat, please put the name of your institution. So, for instance, you can see that I'm there as Cassandra Llosa, and the UNDP, that's my organization. So you can write your name and your organization in the chat. I can see some greetings. I can see Jorge and Ignacio from Corpo Mohana. I don't know if I have pronounced it. Uh, we will just say hello so as to know who we are sharing this meeting place with. This effort from the consultation and the project is thanks to the joint work with our colleagues of the office, the country office, and the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, and the technical support of the Humboldt Institute. Before starting, I would like to take a picture, just as if we were in-person meeting, so as to remember this meeting. It will be virtual, but if you can turn on your cameras, and it's so nice to see you. So I can see you, Gustavo, Adriana, that's so nice. Monica, give me the green light. Oh, there are so many pictures. Four screens. I mean, there are so many participants, Daniela. So pleased to see you. And I can see all the greetings, Neil from WCS. Marion will take the picture. Marion, let me know when it's ready. Done. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, if you want to stay with your cameras on, that's okay with me. So, to start this place of dialogue and consultation, I will give the floor to Zoraida Hardock, who is Chief of Projects and Sustainable Development of UNDP Colombia. She has been with us from the very beginning of this project. Let's listen to her. Zoraida, you have the floor. Good morning, all of you. It's a true pleasure to have you on this second meeting of this consultation workshop of restoration hope for Colombia. For the I'm Chief of Development of Sustainable Development for UNDP. I want to welcome you in our first workshop that we did in August, if I'm not mistaken. We had a group of experts in restoration, so we were able to carry out a workshop with really very valuable feedback. To date, we have reached really important results thanks to the participation of all of you. We have gathered information at national level, which was really important in the creation of the map for Colombia, in restoration for Colombia, and we are submitting it today. The idea today is to discuss the uses of this tool that we have built together. This is not just a discussion place, it's a place where each idea will be something to work on at, to work in Colombia in restoration. Today, now, this is a crucial issue in our proposal, in our way towards restoration. We want this to be a place of inspiration and a platform for all of us, so that the discussion today helps us define how to use this map of priorities of restoration, how to have an impact in our territories, in our communities, having an impact, a positive impact in the territories and in the environment. We want to sincerely thank all of you because of your dedication to this global project of restoring hope in Colombia, your commitment to restoration and hope. We are and will keep on being, through our commitment, agents of change, and we know that our conversations will take us a step closer to hope. That's what we want in this project. That's why after this session, we'll give all these technical documents and the output and the outcome, so that the country can use it in the restoration programs and the help in all the projects in the short term up to 2030. But this continues after 2030, and it's important that this goes on in our territories. Restoration should go on, and recovery of all the ecosystems for our biodiversity. So we should have really a very constructive interchanges in order to really be able to restore hope in Colombia. Thank you for your participation and welcome. Thank you, Zoraida, for the work that we have been doing from the beginning. Now, I also, Daniela Peñalosa of the Ministry of Welcome.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Buenos días para todos y todas. Desde el Ministerio también estamos muy agradecidos y muy contentos de la amplia participación que hemos tenido en este espacio.
We are very
Como ustedes
grateful
saben,
for your
estamos
participation in
liderando la
this
construcción de la estrategia
space.
nacional de
You know,
restauración
we are leading
2023-2026
the
y nuestro compromiso
restoration
con la estrategia es
in
poder orientar esa restauración
2026.
a nivel
Our
para que
strategy is
poder
to be
incluso
able to
recuperar
guide
nuestras
that
calidades de
restoration
ecosistemas,
in terms of
incrementar la resiliencia ante
landscapes
el
and
cambio climático
increase
y
the
sin duda mejorar
resilience
el bienestar de las comunidades.
regarding the
Nos
climate
parece muy
change
importante
and
la
the
participación de nuestros
resilience of
compromisos en este
communities.
espacio que
It's very
podamos,
important
como
our
bien lo decía Zoraida,
participation
llegar a
in these
conversaciones,
spaces, as Zoraida
discusiones,
said.
temas técnicos que todos tenemos que
Conversations and
realmente
discussions
las
are key
instituciones,
about the
empresas,
topics that
academia,
we've been
espero que
experiencing from our
estos espacios,
own
estos diálogos son
contexts. So I
bastante
think these
necesarios,
spaces are
bastante
very
importantes
necessary and
para nosotros
important
desde el
for
ministerio, son demasiado
us
enriquecedores porque
in
nos
the
permiten
ministry.
trabajar
This is
juntos,
very
identificar y priorizar
enrichable
esas
because
áreas
this allow
que necesitan una
us
intervención urgente en temas de
to
restauración.
strengthen these areas that
La
need
ministra
the
la
urgent restoration.
diputada
Also,
Westphal
the
hizo un
ministry
saludo
and
muy
the
especial y un
chief
agradecimiento, así como
extend
lo hizo
their
Zoraida por su amplia
thanks
participación
and
en estos espacios. De
appreciation
verdad
for your
esperamos poder
participation in these
seguir
spaces.
trabajando
We
para
hope
poder
to
recuperar
continue
las
working
naturalezas
together
públicas.
in order to
Muchas
recover
gracias.
our lost nature.
Muchísimas
Many
gracias
thanks.
a ti, Daniela, por esta
Thank you,
palabra
Daniela, for
de
your
introducción.
words,
Estamos muy
your
agradecidos también
introduction
por el
words.
trabajo
We
que
are
están
very grateful as
realizando
well
el
for
Ministerio
our
también de Desarrollo
work
Sostenible
we've
en
been
este proyecto, y
doing
sobre todo
together
por
with the
haber compartido con
development
nosotros su
ministry,
conocimiento y guía
and
para
especially for your
guiar
sharing of
con
knowledge
los datos
to unblock the power of the space data for this exercise of prioritization. Please remember to introduce yourself. Thank you, Marta. Parkio from Sucre and William from Double SS are saying hello. Thank you for renaming yourself so we can know who we are talking to today. I would like to explain quickly the objectives of this webinar and the logistic for our joint session. So we can share the slides regarding the objectives of the webinar. Following our first round of consultation, we are initiating our second consultation round and sharing the final results of this project in the 5 pilot countries. We are going to have the objectives of the project first to remember them in case someone's new in our session. So the objectives of the project are identifying and prioritizing the fields that are important to adopt and the restoration measures, and to review the strategic priorities of the country regarding restoration, and to determine the world data. For example, this exercise in the first consultation, and finally, to apply the methods of systemic planification in order to achieve this scientific goal that the project requires. For this, we have in this session a detailed and exhaustive agenda that our colleague Marion is going to share in the chat with you. In the next slide, we have a diagram that is showing us these two consultation rounds. The first one, Zoraida, you weren't wrong. It was in August, but I feel it was just a few time ago. But in August, it was our first round of consultation, and based on that, we will be sharing this analysis that our colleague Marion will share also the report of that first consultation. You have it already in the chat, and it's in the projects file as well. This first consultation on 17 and 18 of August, we presented an introduction of the project and the vision of the project. Next slide. Also, the science behind the project, which is the systematic planification of conservation for the restoration, and also the review of data, which was necessary for this analysis. Especially, we are focused on capturing your feedback about the data and its update in order to be able to do the analysis. And from there, or since there to now, we've been able to work on this. Thank you as well to Zoraida and others who have helped us from the UNDP and other institutions that have helped us to gather all of this information and provide the analysis that we will be presenting today. So the second consultation, we will be reviewing this updated review of the restoration map regarding Colombia, and the representations that will show the data gathered. And so we will be able to focus on this updated data and and based on your comments and feedback. We will have a feedback session of this last map to be presented, especially regarding the possibilities of application of this and the actors that we will be involved in this socialization and legitimization actions or possibilities of the tool. You also have access to a Drive file where you will be able to gather all presentations and other information from the webinar. My colleague Marion will copy the link in the chat again. So this is the agenda for today. We can see it in the slides. And also in the chat, Marion has already shared, we've already had the welcoming words, and we will have this brief presentation about the advancements of the first consultation under Liliana Corso's charge from the UNDP, and also the systematic process for restoration in Colombia under Oscar's charge, and also Elise Sang. We will present the update of the data for this second exchange, and we will also have a presentation and restoration of the map. This will be linked to a feedback exercise focusing that will allow us to focus on your feedback. And also the presentation about the biodiversity lab. We will show something that is recent and we will be sharing with you, which is regarding the restoration and the space of work for this project. So before giving the floor to the first presenter, I would like to thank the institutions that make possible this project in Colombia, beginning with the UNDP office in Colombia, who have been helping us from the beginning of this project and facilitated the spaces for this dialogue, and also the Sustainable Development Department, who also has helped us to determine the project for the priority needs of Colombia regarding how we can contribute to this restoration process. And also I would like to thank the Humboldt Institute for their support and the guide that they gave us at the beginning of the project. This wouldn't have been possible without the support of the biological diversity department. So thank you. Now let's focus on the presentation. I will give the floor to Liliana, who will explain the progress made from the first consultation, what we have achieved in terms of data, and she will also explain the next steps of this expected for this from this session. Thank you, Cassandra. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you again for your presence today. It's a pleasure to have you today and to share the advancements we've achieved from the first consultation within the framework of this project, Restoring Hope for Colombia. In the first place, the idea is to see how those reflections on the first consultation, the stakeholders, participation. Next slide. So these are the great results from this first webinar. As it was shared in the chat, we have the report that details each one of the presentations and the videos in case someone wants to review something specific. We have the videos for each one of the presentations. So I invite you to see them and use the presentation. Now, seeing the results of this first workshop, as many of you have said, one of the greatest results was the great amount of participants, or experts, approximately more than 140, both nationally and regional at national and regional levels. Everyone participated openly, and it was a very enrichable space. We shared the knowledge and perspectives about this topic. And we also had the possibility of review the national strategy for restoration, and especially how this project, Restoring Hope, can contribute to the achievement of the national and global objectives that we have. We also made an analysis about the information we had gathered, and we could realize about the needs of updating and improving, and what other information we needed to gather. So this workshop helped us a lot to gather that information. And finally, we shared all together our expectations and priorities regarding the needs of Colombia, and we could generate a joint vision and a collaborative focus for this ecologic restoration. What have been the progress that we have achieved, and what data we have gathered? Maybe you remember a bit this slide from our colleague D, who showed us like by information groups, which would be the information that we require for to generate this map. This is like a base map for the base strategy for Colombia, and we generated some main points. This is like the gathered information. In this case, we subdivided this in topics, in ecosystems, biodiversity, ecosystemic services, and socioeconomical information. We also have the zones topic and the environmental integrity topic. In this slide, I would like to stress all the information that we gathered. Many of this information, and especially the one in pink, is all the updated information. So we updated the layer of tundra, the tropical dry forests, and the pastures systems, and the endemic species, and the invasion species. And we also restored a lawyer from the Humboldt Institute, which is very interesting. We also could include this zonification layer of dry and semi-humid areas. We also updated the carbon emissions projected, and there was an important update here with the national study of water. Regarding the social and economic information, we also updated the layer of Black communities and rural reservation areas. Our vision for the future and expectations or expectations for this workshop. So next slide, please. Here, we wanted to, this actually was like a requirement from the ministry. We wanted to show you these maps, these potential ecosystem maps. You can see them on the left side, and on the right side, you can see the habitat distribution of potential habitat distribution of Colombia. This is where we should get if we could if we could restore absolutely everything in the country. This would be like the future. So we obviously know that we can't get to this future, but we will try to get to the most similar scenery possible. So the habitat distribution map here in the green part, it's showing us the forests. And as we identify with this is a forest country. Here we have our great need and our goals that we need to achieve with this restoration topic. Next slide, please. Of course, we have some goals that are very important to achieve, both globally, which is the Convention for Biological Diversity. These show the degraded areas that need an effective restoration with the purpose of the ecological integrity. This is a very important goal and a very complex goal that invites us to work hard. Of course, we also have the restoration strategy at national level. This is a very important goal as well. We have lots of work to do here. Next slide. So having all of these needs that we need to cover, which would be the expectations of this workshop? We would like to provide a space where we can have some feedback about the results from the mapping exercise, and also to gather the opinions about the applications and uses that we can give to this priority map, and also the perspectives, to obtain these perspectives about the next steps. And we hope to count with your valuable comments and feedback for the restoration, which is our joint goal. And again, thank you for being in this space. And I would like to invite you for the next discussions. This is a space to talk and to have a great conversation about this topic.
Thank you, Liliana, for this presentation. If you have questions, below your screen, you have the possibility of reactions. You can raise your hands or in the chat. We are looking at your questions, and as presentations go on and we have all this possibility of feedback, there will be more comments and questions. As there are no questions, we will move on to the second part of today's workshop, where we will move on to our scientific team and the presentation on how we use the systematic planning of conservation. Dee will give a presentation on data that have been used to map priorities of the policies used for this analysis. So Dee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cassandra. Hi, everyone. I'm Di Zhang. I'm a spatial planning and biodiversity expert with the UNDP. It's a pleasure to be here and good to see you all again. During the first consultation, we have received many useful advice from you on what spatial data should be updated in the analysis and what are the other important features we should include in this mapping process in identifying the restoration priority. Thanks to you all, and thanks to Liliana's incredible help to reach out to you and collect these data, we now have integrated your suggestion within the second iteration of restoration priority map. So my presentation here is to introduce the overall spatial data structure and the layer used in this mapping process, with a focus on the updates and changes after the first workshop. and later Oscar will introduce an overview of this SAP approach and will show you the updated result map. With that, I want to start my introduction with a recap of the overview of the data structure. We can broadly break them down into 4 data groups: base map, planning features, zones, and optionally locking constraints. Also, as Lily just introduced in her presentation, each group of data has slightly different requirements on the spatial data used. As a brief overview and a recap, so the base map here defines the range and the scale of our planning area. Here we're doing a national scale map, so we're using the national boundary of Colombia as the base map. And then the planning area will be divided into a set of discrete areas. In GIS term, this equals to pixels of a raster layer, where each unit can be independently calculated and selected. So in the current iteration of the mapping process, we used 250 meter as the resolution for the map, which is also the size for each planning unit. For the next data group is also our main focus today, is the planning features. These are the data layers that can spatially identify restoration needs as well as the potential multiple benefits. Here we are using the same clusters as introduced by Humboldt in the land cover integrity layer. This include ecosystem diversity, land cover integrity, and ecosystem services. And then the third group is zones. Zones are areas that determine where restoration action can be implemented within the country. This is the spatial hard constraint for this analysis to select restoration priorities only within the zones defined. And here in this analysis, we used degraded areas identified nationally as the zone for restoration priority. The last data group is an optional choice, the lock-in constraints. By selecting an area to lock in, it makes sure that the final result map will include these areas as a restoration priority. For example, if there are areas already in National Restoration Agreement and should be fully reflected or represented in the final result map, we can choose to lock in them. In the updated version, after a discussion with national experts and stakeholders, we agreed to not lock in any areas in the mapping process. All right, with that overview in mind, here is the full list of spatial planning features included in this analysis to help identify where are the most important areas to restore while maximize multiple benefits in biodiversity, ecosystem services, climate change mitigation, as well as land cover integrity. I wouldn't go through each layer in detail today, as we already did that during the first round workshop, but I will introduce the updated layers here, which is highlighted in different color. Layers in yellow are same features, but we updated the data to the latest available year. And then layers in the blue color are new features we added into this analysis. And by the third column, you can see almost all of them are national data from Colombia, except only one layer, which is the international key biodiversity areas. We used the latest global data for the year 2023. All right, now let's take a closer look of these updated layers. The first few are key ecosystems in Colombia. That includes the coverage of tropical Paramo ecosystem in Colombia updated to the year 2021. And then we also have updated coverage of tropical dry forest ecosystem, the latest data this year on the coverage of tropical continental wetland ecosystem in Colombia, as well as the latest mangrove coverage data. Then we also updated the connectivity analysis between protected areas to the latest data in 2023. Sorry. Then the next few layers are spatial richness. This is also updated to the latest analysis. This layer we're looking at is the richness of threatened species in Colombia, including categories of critically in risk, endangered, vulnerable. And then the higher values are more threatened, higher value represent higher richness of the threatened species. Then we also updated this richness layer for endemic species, where higher value indicate areas with more endemic species distribution. And now, then this layer is the zoning of very dry, arid, and dry subhumid lands. This is a layer to replace the previous soil degradation by erosion layer, according to the feedback during the first workshop. And then this is an updated layer for vulnerability to climate change from an analysis of biological communities. The next one is a new feature added to this analysis. This is the velocity of climate change. This is the estimation of the direction and speed in which a species should move to maintain its current climate conditions under climate change scenarios. We selected the scenarios of RCP 8.5, which is a higher emission scenario. But here we used a reversed value of this layer to highlight area with more climate stability. So those stable zones can be considered as more suitable for restoration actions, where actions, restore actions can also maintain even with the climate impact. The next layer is the total water demand. This is updated to the year 2020. This overall water demand include water demand in agriculture, mining, energy, livestock sectors, domestic use, and industry use. And the higher value represent higher demand for the water. The next one is the municipalities susceptible to water shortages. This is a layer updated to the latest analysis in 2022. Here we have included water shortage scenario in both wet season and drought season based on the analysis carried out in the period of 2017 to 2021. Next, three features are key communities updated and added into the analysis. This includes an updated Black community councils, indigenous areas, and a new added feature of the peasant reserve zones. And the last new feature I want to introduce here is the integrated water analysis in Colombia. This analysis considers water variability and the effects on supply and dynamics of droughts and sediments, where a higher value represent higher water vulnerability. And above are the updated layer and the new planning features we added into the analysis. I'm happy to take any questions. And to carry on from here, Oscar will introduce the updates we did for the degraded areas and the identification of restore zones, as well as the updated result map for restoration priority. With that, I'll say thank you, and back to you, Cassandra.
Muchas gracias, Di, por tu presentación.
Thank you, Dee, for your presentation. If there are any comments or questions about this presentation, yes, there's something from Marta. Yeah, I mean, the email can be shared so as to share this specific information about the archipelagos in San Andres. Thank you for your comment from Martha. There's a new comment. Yeah, so now Liliana is sharing her email. Suan is saying the low diversity reported in the plains. Is it due because there's no data or because diversity is low? Probably Liliana can answer you on the chat. We'll go over that as we move to the next presentation. Thank you. Liliana will check that and will answer your question. So we will now move on to presentation about different scenarios to minimize the cost of opportunity and minimizing under this umbrella of restoration, rehabilitation, and Oscar Venter, who is the scientific leader of this project. Oscar, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Cassandra. While Monica pulls up my presentation, I just want to make one quick reflection on Dee's presentation. It's amazing how the diversity of data that Colombia has, spatial data on ecosystems, species, and climate change, and land cover. But to see the number of data sets that Dee updated since we did the essential life support area work a couple of years ago, almost half the data sets have been updated in that 2 years, which just shows an incredible really commitment to maintaining not only a diversity of data for the country, but also really temporally relevant data through frequent updating. So just wanted to say how impressed I was to see that. Okay, so I'm going to have your attention for quite a while, maybe about 30 minutes, and we're going to cover quite a lot of ground. For Colombia, there was quite a few additional analyses that we've done to identify the restoration priorities. So I'll bring you through that in this talk. It'll be broken down into about 4 sections. And after each section, I'll just pause for a bit to open the floor to questions and discussions. I think we do have quite a bit of time for the session overall, so I encourage you, if you do have anything you'd like to add, to please take the opportunity to do so. So just to start, what I'm showing you here on this slide is just the overall perspective of our workflow to identify the restoration priorities, starting with just understanding the distribution of natural ecosystems in the country. And that's defined by data that Liliana just showed you. The next really important thing that we do is to identify opportunities for the restoration of ecosystems. And this is really about mapping degraded areas. And I'll show you that work in a minute. Then a really large work area is to map the potential benefits of restoration. And that's really the data that Dee was showing you, all those different data sets that we call planning features that really define the ecological values in Colombia and the things that can benefit from restoring ecosystems. Then for Colombia, we've got two additional work areas where we identify restorations based on opportunity costs as well as climate resilience. So we're actually going to run three scenarios for creating a restoration priority map for Colombia. And I'll speak about that obviously a little bit later. The end result is to take all of this data into a systematic conservation planning framework to actually identify priorities for restoration. So we've done that, and we've got a few priority restoration maps, which I'll show you. And then we actually do a post hoc analysis after we have the restoration priorities, because Colombia really breaks out restoration into three different related actions of restoration, rehabilitation, and recovery of ecosystems. We try and break out the restoration map into those different forms of restoration. So this is just the overview. I'll obviously go through this in detail as we move forward. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the first place I want to start is the degradation mapping. This is the mapping that defines the restore zone for Colombia. So these are places that were once a natural ecosystem. They've undergone degradation, and now they are candidates for restoration, not necessarily priorities, but they're candidates. This work was led by my colleague Scott Atkinson, so I'm presenting really the work that he did. I'll do my best to answer any questions at the end, but if it's something I can't address, we'll circle back to you later. So two basic data sets were used to map the degraded areas. The first was the ecological integrity layer, which is a recent national data set, and I'll show it to you in detail. This is as far as we went for our first consultations, to use as ecological integrity data. But then based on feedback during the session, it was highlighted that that data had somewhat of a focus on forests and might miss out some of the other drier ecosystems. And based on that feedback, we've integrated a second data set, which is national data on human footprint for Colombia, to complement the integrity data to map the degraded areas. Next slide, please. So the first data is the National Ecological Integrity Data Layer. It combines, I believe, about 15 input layers that respectively map ecosystem diversity, land cover integrity, and ecosystem services to map out landscape integrity, varying from very low through to low, medium, and high integrity. So we considered places of medium and high integrity to be not degraded. So degraded areas are places mapped as very low or low integrity based on these data. Next slide, please. And then to complement those data, we use the national data on human footprint, basically taking a similar approach to the integrity data, dividing the map based on the values, selecting the 50% of the country with the highest human footprint, considering these areas then to be degraded. So human footprint is a combined measure of the various ways that we've changed ecosystems. So this includes land cover change, but also things like our infrastructures, electric infrastructure, road networks, resource extraction, human settlements. These are all combined into this continuous measure of human footprint. So we've taken these two maps, the map of landscape integrity to define degraded areas, and then the map of human footprint to further define degraded areas. And then we combine those together. Can I ask you to go to the next slide, Monica? And the combination of these is what you're seeing here. This is the overall map of degraded areas based on integrity and human footprint. So in orange are places when we run the optimization to find priority areas for restoration. We're only looking within these degraded areas as potential candidates for restoration. I see that somebody really didn't like our mapping and has put a big red cross through there. So we value your input, and we'll open up to discussion in just a minute. I wonder if anyone on the technical side might see if there's a way to remove that. It seems to carry over from one slide to the next, and we've got about 20 more slides to go. Next slide, please, Monica. So some of the feedback around the mapping degraded areas pertain to a focus on moist forest. So here we just wanted to show that the distribution of the degraded areas mapping across some important biomes. So on the x-axis here is the proportion of Colombia covered by each of these major ecotypes. The gray bar represents the total area of the ecotype, and then the orange within that bar represents the proportion of that ecotype which we're mapping as degraded. So on top you can see forests overall, and then in the bottom you can see dry tropical forests, then one down, and Andean forests and savanna ecosystems. And you can see that these arid ecosystems are actually mapped, many of them as quite degraded through our mapping. So there doesn't appear to be a focus here on humid tropical forests, but rather the degradation mapping is dispersed across the major ecotypes that were flagged for us during the last consultation. Okay, so that's all I want to present here for the degradation mapping. This is quite an important step for us, obviously, because it's an important step to setting the area-based target, because the Global Biodiversity Framework commitment is to restore 30% of degraded areas. So the first step is to map the degraded areas like we've done. Thank you for that, Monica. And then also when we do the optimization, it's constrained by this degraded area mapping. So it's quite important. So yeah, I'll pause now and see if there's any comments or questions about this part of the work.
Gracias, Oscar. Sí, tenemos un comentario de Andrés.
Thank you,
También
Oscar. Yes, we have a comment from Andres. I put it in the English chat in case it's useful for you to read it. Anyway, I am commenting this. He was mentioning regarding the presentation and the information gathered, which zones of the countries have more scarcity or shortage. That question was answered by Liliana. We used information provided from institutions, and she considered there isn't a shortage in general. And what would be the criteria for the presentation regarding the maps and presentation already seen?
Sorry, Cassandra, was that a question? If so, I'm not sure how to address it.
Yes, the question is which are the criteria based on all the data gathered to prioritize data over some data over other, which I've explained that in other opportunities, but perhaps you can explain, Andres, which is the criteria for the data to use in the analysis.
That's a pretty multifaceted question. So in general, We're selecting data that is mapped consistently across the country. We have to exclude any data that's only mapped for a given region, because that would serve to bias the national analysis. Beyond that, we are generally selecting data that supports existing environmental commitments within Colombia. So there's 30 planning features mapped for Colombia. The selection of those was done largely 2 years ago, when we mapped essential life support areas for Colombia and underwent a large policy review to identify key commitments to nature, and that guided the selection of data. Basically, the data represent important environmental variables for the country, as well as constraints on conservation actions such as land cover, the distribution of urban areas. So that's the type of data. And then selecting individual data sets, we tended to favor national data over global, high resolution over low resolution, and recent over old. I hope that is in the ballpark to answer your question, Andres.
Muchas gracias, Oscar. Y no tenemos por ahora más
Many
consultas.
thanks, Oscar. We don't have any more consultations for now. You can always raise your hands or write in the chat. Otherwise, we can continue. Andres, thank you for your answer.
Okay, thanks. Great, Monica, could you, thank you. All right, so the first section we just discussed is around the degradation mapping. Now we're going to move into identifying the priority areas for restoration. So to do this, we harness the tools of systematic conservation planning. They serve to help us identify priority places in Colombia to restore ecosystems in a way that maximizes the benefits to biodiversity, climate change, mitigation and adaptation, as well as human well-being, so through ecosystem services. So that's our overall aim to it when we identify the restoration priorities and our approach of using systematic conservation planning. Next slide, please. As we discussed during our first consultation a few weeks ago, the work to identify these priorities really builds off the extensive process we underwent in partnership with Colombia to identify the essential life support areas about 2 years ago. This process lasted about 8 months. It involved an in-depth policy review and hackathon to identify the critical commitments to nature Colombia has made in various policies, as well as available national data that can reflect those commitments spatially. A large process of acquiring and processing all those spatial data. Again, I think almost all of them are national data, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. And then building a systematic conservation planning tool, and then through a consultation process, using that tool to identify the most important values and priorities to protect, manage, and restore based on those values. So we were able to use a lot of the spatial data and the existing systematic conservation planning tool from the ELSA work as part of this Restoring Hope work that we're working on now. Next slide, please. And just a very quick recap of the systematic conservation planning approach. Colombia does a lot of systematic conservation planning itself, most commonly using MarkZan or Zonation, which are particular software packages. In our case, we're using Prioritizer. Conceptually, it's very similar. It just runs a little bit faster. So the basic, what we call problem formulation, is that when we're using the tool, we are trying to meet area-based targets for nature. So in this case, it's a restoration target of achieving 30% restoration of degraded ecosystems in Colombia. So it's an area-based target. This converts to about 15% of the country, because our degradation mapping reveals about half of the country being mapped as degraded. So the actual target that we're working towards is 30% of degraded areas, 15% of the country's land area. When the optimization runs, it only searches within places which it considers actions of restoration to be feasible. These are places that are mapped as degraded. But then to actually select sites to as priorities for restoration, it does that based on trying on places that will maximize the benefits for mapped biodiversity, mapped climate change indices, and mapped human well-being. So it's trying to maximize the coverage of all of these 30 input data sets that we've developed, and Dee quickly summarized in her talk. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, we're not going to look at each of the individual data sets. Monica, can you go forward one slide? But here I'm just quickly showing you an overview of those data sets grouped into these three themes again. So the first map you can see is a heat map of ecosystem diversity. So the redder, warmer colors in this map show high overlap of multiple indices of ecosystem diversity. So these are places where restoration might benefit ecosystem diversity the most. The second map shows our measures of land cover diversity. And the third and final map shows the heat map, or the concentration of ecosystem services. So Dee quickly showed you the list of the 30 data sets defining each one of these themes. But as part of what we share after this consultation, you'll be able to see these in more detail. I just wanted to give you a quick overview. So on my next slide, I'm going to be showing you the restoration priority map. Thank you, Monica. So just a reminder, to reach this restoration map, we are setting an area-based target of restoring 15% of Colombia, which equates to 30% of degraded areas as per Global Biodiversity Framework's restoration target. We are then running an optimization that searches within the mapped degraded areas for places where restoration will lead to the greatest combined benefits across all of those 30 input data sets and those three themes that I just showed you the heat maps for. So the result of that optimization is this priority map that I'm showing you here. Orange areas equate to 15% of the country and are, based on this analysis, priorities for restoration. So after this PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to bring up the UN Biodiversity Lab, which is a web platform for GIS display and analysis. And we'll be able to look at this map in more detail, can zoom in and query it. So here I just wanted to show you the map. My only reflection right now is that it really is a diversity of regions across Colombia that are being identified as priorities. It's not only one major ecosystem or one major region. It seems to be all regions of Colombia are being considered here. I just wanted to contrast this to some of the results from the essential life support area mapping that was done previously. Monica, if you could go to the next slide. So the purpose of the ELSA mapping was to identify priorities for protection, management, and restoration. So restoration was a component of that work, and we identified priorities for restoration from that work. So I just wanted to show you agreement and disagreement between the current Restoring Hope results and the original ALSA. In green, what you can see in green in the map here, these are places which are identified as priorities for restoration in the ALSA work, as well as the Restoring Hope work. So this is where we see agreement. In purple, pink, these are places that were identified only within the essential life support area process as priorities for restoration, but are no longer being mapped as priorities in the restoration, in the Restoring Hope work. And then blue areas, you could see this is the largest part of the map. These are new places that are emerging as priorities based on the current Restoring Hope work. And the reason for this is that we're using a much more ambitious target. When we did the essential life support area work, the global biodiversity framework didn't exist, and that the international target for restoration didn't exist. And we used instead a national target, which was more conservative. So that's why we're seeing a lot more priorities for restoration now. The reason there's also some places don't agree that were priorities in ALSA is that when we mapped the restore zone, the degradation mapping for this project, we included these new data on landscape integrity. So for the ALSA work, we only used human footprint to identify restoration places that could be restored, but now our degradation mapping is more sophisticated because of the national effort to identify landscape integrity. And that just changed where the optimization could search within Colombia for restoration. So sorry, there's quite a little bit of detail there, but what I've just done is given a bit of a recap of how we use systematic conservation planning and some of the heat maps that drive the optimization. And I've shown you the current map that we have for restoration priorities for Colombia. So I could take another little break here and open the floor to see if there's any comments or questions at this stage.
Muchas gracias, Oscar. Entonces, si tuviéramos alguna pregunta o
Thank you,
comentario.
Oscar. If we had any question or comments, we have some reaction and celebration from about your presentation from the audience, Oscar. If we have any question or comment, please don't forget to raise your hand or write in the chat. Sam has shared in the chat the metadata sheet with detailed descriptions that you can access and review. It seems that we don't have any more comments for now, Oscar.
Okay, thank you, Cassandra. Monica, can I ask you to go back up one slide? Thanks. So this is the base and the primary restoration priority map from our work, based on all the data inputs that we've described so far and the process we've described so far. So in terms of, yeah, the most important restoration map, this is what I would say is the map. But we wanted to dig a little bit deeper. So now I'm going to talk about some alternative scenarios that identify priorities, but consider some other aspects. Monica, if you could go forward 2 slides, please. You could go forward 1 more. Perfect, thanks. Okay, so to restore ecosystems, there's often an opportunity cost to doing so. If an ecosystem is being degraded, it's often for the purposes of another land use. In Colombia, much of the ecosystem conversion is for agricultural production. So these lands, which once were a natural ecosystem, are now being used for producing food and the revenues derived from farming. So when restoring places that are highly suitable for agriculture, there can be a pretty high opportunity cost of undergoing that restoration. So one way to identify priorities is to actually incorporate these potential costs within the optimization. So to run an optimization to achieve the restoration targets, but in places that maximize the benefits while simultaneously minimizing the opportunity costs. So minimizing conflict with economically valuable lands. And again, in Colombia, one of the most important economic values of lands is for agricultural production. So here, the data that I'm showing you maps agricultural opportunity cost as measured by agricultural suitability. These are global data, not national data. But hopefully when you're looking at this map, you feel that it does reflect the actual agricultural suitability of land in Colombia. So what we did to develop a second scenario for priorities is to actually bring in these data on agricultural suitability as a cost in the optimization. So now we're going to run the optimization to achieve the area-based targets while maximizing environmental outcomes, but minimizing conflict or overlap with this agricultural opportunity cost. The results are on the next slide, please. So it's hard to see it's going to be hard for you to see how the map has changed. It has changed quite a lot from the baseline priority map that I previously showed you. In particular, within the Andean region, it's moved a lot of the priorities up into more mountainous areas, as well as pushed more priorities into areas of the Amazon. When I show you these maps in detail on the UNBL, we'll be able to see how things change. But this map that we're seeing here is basically the priorities for restoration in a way that minimizes conflict with agriculture. So it tries to avoid taking the most agriculturally suitable land and identifying it as priorities. It tries to avoid those lands. Now I'm going to show you one further scenario. Monica, if you could go forward one slide. So Dee's already shown you these data. This is one of the 30 planning features that were used. So it was considered in the analysis, but really alongside many other data sets. This is climate change velocity. And sorry, I don't have the reference with me, the metadata for these data, but it's showing you in red or warm colors here. It's showing you the highest climate velocity areas. The way to think about climate velocity, it's the speed at which a species would have to move in order to track the climate that it likes to exist in. So this is measured as really kind of kilometers per year. How many kilometers per year would a species have to move to stay in its proper climate zone? So places which are very high would require a very high migration speed for species. And it might mean that in those places, the species actually can't keep up with climate change, compared to the bluer places where a much slower rate of range shift or migration would allow a species to keep up with climate change. Now, the reason that we consider these data is that we know climate change represents a major risk to environmental outcomes. So if we're looking to restore an ecosystem, investment in restoration can take 50 years to achieve its objectives. Now, in that 50 years, if climate change severely changes the ecosystem, meaning that species that you were trying to restore actually, the habitat becomes unsuitable for them and they can't track with climate, you might not achieve your restoration outcomes. So this climate velocity represents a risk to investments in restoration. So this isn't a measure of cost directly, it's more of a measure of risk, but we've actually used it in the same way as we did the agricultural opportunity cost. We've brought it into the optimization as a cost so that we can identify priorities that avoid overlap with high climate velocity and try and focus on places where the climate's going to be more stable. Now, sorry, this is a little bit of a complicated analysis, so if anything's not clear, I'm going to stop again in a minute and happy to take any comments or questions. But I'll first show you the resulting map. Next slide, please.
Parece que no tenemos preguntas por ahora. Liliana también ha
Oh,
compartido en el chat información sobre la fuente de estos datos.
sorry, Cassandra, could I show
I
one more
think
slide?
there are no questions now.
Sorry, we just jumped a little bit ahead. I just want to show you this last map, which is the third scenario of priorities. These are priorities for restoration that minimize conflict or risks from climate change. And you could see a really big difference in this map. You could see a strong concentration of priorities within the Andean regions where climate velocity is much slower. So these offer you combined 3 alternative scenarios for identifying restoration priorities. One, a baseline scenario. A second, a scenario that minimizes agricultural opportunity costs. And a third scenario, which minimizes climate risks. We'll look at all of these maps in detail after the break. But just so you understand what we're looking at with the maps, this is why I've just kind of gone through the basic concepts and data here. And now we can see, Cassandra, sorry, I'm not sure if there's any comments or questions now.
¿Tuvieran algún comentario? Lo pueden dejar en el chat, así como ya hemos tenido algunos.
If there are any comments, you can leave that on the chat. You can turn on your camera or raise your hand. But I think there are no comments for the time being, Oscar, so we can go on. Yes, Donis Perez. Donis, you can open your microphone if that's better for you, or you can write your comment on the chat. So yeah, we can go on.
Okay, we're moving forward. The next section that I'm going to be talking about, if we go forward, thank you, is once we have the restoration, here we focus now on the baseline restoration priority map, we start to unpack the various forms of restoration in Colombia. So based on the consultation with the national partners, there seems to be 3 major forms of restoration. The first is ecological restoration. The next is ecological rehabilitation. And the third is ecological recovery. So I'll just go through the definitions of each one of these. And really what we're doing here is we're defining not just a general restoration, but really what form, what are the objectives of the restoration. So the first is ecological restoration. Ecological restoration seeks to restore a degraded ecosystem to a condition that is similar to the pre-disturbance ecosystem with respect to its composition, structure, and functioning. The result should be a self-sustaining system and it must guarantee the conservation of species, the ecosystem in general, as well as its ecosystem services. So really, ecological restoration is about bringing the degraded system back to its original state, very importantly, with respect to its native historic species and processes. So this is really the highest objective of restoration, to really return the ecosystem back to its potential original ecosystem. Next slide, please. So the second form of restoration is ecological rehabilitation. Now, this seeks to repair the productivity or the ecosystem services in relation to functional or structural attributes. So it is to rebuild an ecosystem, but the one major change here is it's not necessarily rebuilding the original species, full species composition. It's about recovering structure and function. So this acknowledges that maybe it'll be transitioning to a different ecosystem type than was there originally. So that's rehabilitation. Next slide, please. The final form of restoration in Colombia is ecological recovery. So this seeks to return the usefulness of an ecosystem for the provision of environmental services other than those of the original ecosystem, integrating it ecologically and landscape-wise into its surroundings. So here, really what we're trying to do is improve the ecosystem, not necessarily to the state there where its functional, structural, or compositional aspects are nearing a natural system. It's more of just doing better than its degraded state. So trying to improve its some of the ecosystem services, understanding that it still might be a working landscape. So this is, in a way, kind of a lower objective for restoration, not seeking to recover a full function ecosystem, but having a balance in that area between the provision of services like agricultural services with other ecosystem functions. So here we have three forms of restoration. And our question is, well, within the restoration priority map, where should restoration versus rehabilitation versus recovery be considered? So we did some GIS analyses to help identify where each one of these actions would be most suitable. And we'll just go through that now. If we go to the next slide. So the first thing to consider, we felt, was projected climate change. These data that I'm showing you here represent how biomes, major biomes, are projected to change under climate change. Now, the reason being that ecological restoration to the original ecosystem is probably not a good idea in places where that ecosystem is projected to fundamentally change because of climate change. In that case, probably rehabilitation would be a more effective strategy, where you're trying to achieve a structurally and functionally diverse ecosystem, but acknowledge that the exact species making up that ecosystem might be different than the original one. So we think that climate change would be a really important consideration of trying to define ecological restoration versus rehabilitation. Next slide, please. We also felt that the severity of ecosystem disruption was important. We felt that in places that have been converted to agriculture or converted to urban land uses, that really in these systems, it's recovering some elements, some function, some structure, maybe not to baseline levels, but recovering some level is the most suitable strategy. So this, we use land cover data on agricultural and urban areas. And next slide, please. And then again, we used data on the human footprint. So places that were really converted to a human land use or under very high footprint, we considered these places more suitable for recovery. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to show you a map that breaks out the restoration priorities into these forms of restoration. And just a recap here, full ecological restoration. We're mapping as these are places which are already identified as restoration priorities, but they have lower human footprint or they've not been fully converted, and they're projected to be stable climatically. If it's a forest now and you restore a forest, it's projected to still be a forest by 2080. Rehabilitation, we're mapping these in places that are priorities. They are not severely degraded, so they're not agriculture, urban, or high footprint, but they're projected to undergo a biome shift. So they might shift primarily from forested ecosystems to more arid woodland or savanna ecosystems. So here, the objective is then to rehabilitate structure and function, but maybe not to the same ecosystem. And then the final class is recovery. These are in places that are most converted. Okay, we'll jump forward to the next slide, which is going to show you the map. So this is the same restoration priority map, but breaking it into these three forms of nationally defined restoration actions. So you can see really the bulk of it. The priority areas are places that are highly converted and maybe are best as candidates for ecosystem recovery. But there are places which are being identified as climatically stable and suitable for ecological restoration in blue, as well as places that are climatically unstable being identified for rehabilitation in purple. So in the next session, we're going to look at these maps in more detail in the UNBL, but I'll just maybe stop for a quick second here and see if there's any comments or questions around these three forms of restoration.
Claro que sí, Oscar, tenemos la mano levantada de Luis Alberto.
Okay, we have a raised hand for Luis Alberto. You can open your mic. Can you hear me? Yes. And maybe it wasn't clear, I didn't understand. Ecosystems that were altered at some point, are they object of restoration, rehabilitation, or recovery? Restoration, rehabilitation, or recovery, is it just to we restore so that developing country get environment in order to get on with life, or to get recovery of carbon, or maybe I'm just sort of considering something that is not. I mean, what's the purpose of restoration, rehabilitation, and recovery?
Okay, thanks for the question. So all three of those forms of restoration are only going to be considered in places that have undergone some form of human forced degradation. So if an ecosystem is in its natural state, hasn't been converted or degraded, it won't be considered for anything in this analysis. So that's the basis for the degradation mapping. But then we were informed that there are these three forms of restoration in Colombia. So the highest form is ecological restoration, where you're really trying to bring the system back to its original state. Then there's rehabilitation, where you're really trying to improve the structure and the function of the ecosystem. But because of climate change, you might not be trying to restore it exactly to its original reference state. You might acknowledge that because of climate change, different species might be suitable as part of the rehabilitation of that area. And then recovery, this is recovering elements of a natural ecosystem, but not to the same level as you would get in a natural system. So you could think about an agricultural area receiving some planting of trees to sequester some carbon and improve water cycling, reduce erosion, all the benefits from that. But it's still a system that produces food, but now one that has more biodiversity, more carbon, more ecosystem services. So it's trying to recover or improve the system somewhat. Does that clarify what we call the 3 R's?
Sí, parcialmente.
Partially, but maybe my question was not clear. What I wanted to know about the 3 R's, if creating a niche of the environmental market for environmental services, we know that these happen in ecosystems that have been altered. But what I meant is a different market niche, because we are talking in Colombia about payments for market services, and there are carbon markets, and they are offering money to communities that have been affected, and also to communities that. So what I think is that there's a sort of a niche uh, about sort of money, giving money to these communities. Is that so?
And Luis, I think you're opening the floor to a very interesting discussion. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer that in terms of the marketability of the ecosystem services within these 3 R's. So I would almost welcome reflections from anybody else to what Luis is saying. Luis, I'll just give a quick
Perfecto,
thought.
muchas gracias.
Thank you. Yes, there's a comment. It depends on the regional authorities. Yes, maybe in the feedback exercise, there may be potential uh, possibilities about identifying priority areas for these 3, and we can consider this market niche. Here Adriana is saying that they are not showing on the map, that they are not showing the areas that Adriana says she would like to say on the same map where these different areas of restoration, rehabilitation, and recovery can be seen. I think what Adriana is saying is that we are showing a map of priority areas, but the market niche is something different. And as Oscar said, this is a different discussion. It's a financial mechanisms to finance a restoration, rehabilitation, and recovery. It's something different after this exercise, once the areas are prioritized. So, Oscar, there are no more questions for the time being. So, well, you can tell me when we can go to our break.
Okay, I'll maybe just have one more comment around the
Solamente.
So I'll just maybe make one comment about the market opportunities. As Enrique highlights, really it's a separate process. You know, a payments for ecosystem service program might give out an opportunity to all farmers within an area to participate in a program to increase tree cover. The map that you're seeing here might be able to help at that later stage inform those programs when you receive bids or offers from farmers to participate in the program. You might be able to evaluate, overlap those particular farm areas with a map like this and see, okay, was this particular farm identified as a priority for restoration because of all the environmental values within the region, all of the spatial data that we're using, which highlights carbon, ecosystem services, and biodiversity. We know that the places that are in this map have a very high environmental values, and at a later stage, a map like this can help inform those programs. But those economic programs really are a different step from this. So I do have one more slide I want to show, which focuses on the economics. Monica, if you want to just step forward. Now, this is just really a partial picture of the economics of restoration. This is focusing on the implementation costs. So when we have the restoration priority map, it's about 15% of Colombia is being identified as a priority for restoration to achieve the national target. Now, we've used this data from this paper. You can see the reference at the bottom. It's an evaluation of the costs and benefits of restoration by Humboldt, and there's four participants or four authors of this study, where they've estimated the costs by major ecotypes in Colombia. So you can see tropical dry forests, paramos, wetlands, mangroves, and Andean forests. The third or the fourth column over gives the costs per hectare in US dollars, or the next one in pesos, or sorry, the one before, per hectare cost. So you can see the per hectare cost for each one of the ecosystem types. And then if we come back now to the first column, you can see the number of hectares of each of those ecotypes which were identified as a priority for restoration. You can see that Andean forest was the highest priority, then wetlands and paramos, the next largest areas. So when we come over to the last two columns, it gives estimates based on the data from this paper from Humboldt Institute 2 years ago of the total cost of restoring all the areas in the priority map. And you can see the costs are quite high, up to $11 billion to restore all of the Andean forests, 2 million, 2.5 million for Paramos, over 3 million to restore wetlands. So this is just an estimation of how much it would cost to actively implement restoration within all of these areas. This could serve as a benchmark for understanding the costs. I want to make two really important points, though. The first and really the most important point is that this is only the downside, the economic downside, or the costs of restoration. We know that restoration leads to a huge number of benefits for local communities, biodiversity, climate mitigation. So there's a big plus side to restoration that's not being accounted for in this dollar accounting. We're only looking at the downsides. So just always keep that in mind. It might be that there's a net economic benefit to restoring many of these areas. And finally, we know that within an ecosystem, so within Andean forests, some places are more expensive to restore than others. For instance, places on very steep slopes can be hard to actively restore because of landslides, or places that are closer to cities, the land costs can be higher. So there's some spatial variability that's not accounted for here. But this is just a starting point using existing national data for Colombia. Okay, so Cassandra, that's I covered a lot of ground. Normally we don't cover this many different topics, but Colombia, there were just so many interesting questions and requests that came from the first consultation. So I just wanted to really cover that, the degradation mapping, how we identified priorities, how we then change those priorities with cost and climate change, and then unpack them into the 3 Rs. And Yer even gave a bit of an estimate of the costs to restore them. So thanks for bearing with me. I've probably gone a bit over time, but we've covered quite a lot of ground.
No, muchas gracias a ti, Oscar. Tenemos algunos comentarios, un par de ellos van a ser atendidos por Liliana. Ya ha comentado ella acerca
Have
de
a few comments that will answer Liliana. We have mentioned the cost of implementation. Andres, it seems that there is a mistake in the conversion of pesos and dollars. If we could answer Andres. Celine also comments about the calculation. Liliana can attend that. In the meantime, we can ask Oscar the questions we have for him. Just to add something, Celine added something about the values per ecosystem, what has to do with these consultations. If you could help us answering about that in the chat. And Juan also asks Oscar, he also left his question in English. I am translating it into Spanish so everyone can know what's the question. Thank you for your presentation of the map about the ecosystems and the slides. I would like to know how you calculated these areas. And from that, the second question is that in Colombia, we have important geographic census and available information. So my question is, how do we manage this? Is it possible that the resulting areas are like with a tendency because of this?
I'm sorry, I might need a bit of help with that question around the census areas.
Yes, what I can do now again, Oscar, is because there are many comments now in the chat. I'm going to copy that in the chat again, the question in English. If you can access the Zoom chat, you will see the question in English. In the meantime, I am seeing that Liliana is replying many consultations about the costs and calculations presented. Thank you, Liliana, for that. And Joanna, yes, we can access the data. Liliana, if you can share this information to Joanna, with Joanna. Dee also share the link of data. If you could please share that with Joanna as well. And when you are ready, Oscar, could you please comment us in order to answer the question of Juan?
Yeah, so the first question is around the maps of ecosystem diversity and ecosystem services. So the way those were mapped, I believe you've looked at the metadata, and it gives the individual data sets, which we've grouped into each one of those themes or classes around diversity and services. So I'm not sure what you mean by calculate the areas. So we map them based on all the data sets listed in the metadata. And then that is put into the optimization. So there's a total of 30 data sets then going in the optimization. And the software will try and select areas that are currently degraded that achieve the 15% or 30% restoration target, and then maximize overlap with those 30 individual data sets. So that's how we identify. We go from those individual data sets to the restoration priority map. I think that might be what you're asking when you refer to calculating those areas. It's that optimization process. And then you mentioned that many of your data sets for Colombia have geographic bias. This again is really common everywhere, where our sampling is biased to the more accessible areas. So for instance, species occurrence data, we normally sample and find species in places and ecosystems that we can access, and we don't find them in more distant places. Those biases are attempted to be minimized through modeling. So we don't, for instance, use data on species occurrence. We use species distribution modeling to take those occurrences, those observed occurrences, and relate them to topographic and climatic variables, so that we can identify in the broader landscape, even places that haven't been sampled, that the species might occur based on topography and climate. But yeah, that's a good point. There's biases in the data. It influences everything we ever do spatially. So all this work to map priorities for restoration would also be influenced by some of those data uncertainties. I would say that Colombia is worlds ahead of most places in terms of data quality, very high quality sampling and modeling. So probably stronger data sets than are available in other places, but yeah, still vulnerable to biases.
Muchísimas gracias, Oscar, y Juan agradece por tu
Thank you,
respuesta.
Oscar, and Juan thanks you for your reply. Also, Liliana is attending all the consultations in the chat. It's important that Liliana can access the databases to see how the implementation costs were identified. She will share all of that with you. Thank you for your comments about the restoration costs and its variation depending the degradation state and the process, and what you said about how we can consider the costs. We are taking notes about that. Oscar, do you think it would be a good idea to go to a pause for 5 minutes, to pause us for 5 minutes, to continue reviewing the map of restoration priorities and the feedback exercise and the potential applications or its potential applications for Colombia.
I would appreciate 5 minutes. I'm sure others would too.
Perfecto. 5 minutos para un cafecito. Nos vemos en 5 minutos.
5 minutes for a coffee. We will see you in 5 minutes.
3, 2, 1, listo,
3, 2,
estamos.
1, ready. We are, everyone has came back. It's like in the theater. First call, second call, please. Third call. I have already had a good coffee. Well, not as good as the Colombian one, but for sure it will help. Thank you, Liliana, that has continued answering your questions. Maria Camila asks if we could share the link with the information. So if we could copy in the chat our Drive file would be very useful. Maria Camila, you will be able to access all presentations and other resources. We will put the link before the explanation of this third. Celine, we will listen to you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I will only propose that then in the next opportunity in the webinars, we delve into the costs topics because there have been different ecosystems and that we've included in the process. So it also depends if the diagnosis and like administrative costs have been included and what type of strategy is being implemented according to the type of the ecosystem, if it's pasture or others. So in that regard, it would be important to include the costs with the experiences and project parts already executed. I think it would be important to have that information so we can have the costs regarding maintenance as well, how many were done and things like that. So what did the costs include? That's like the question to have a more like assertive result regarding the restoration. Yes, we are taking note on that. It could be a comment within the exercise that we will have regarding feedback and the potential applications and analysis, future analysis. We can include that. Thank you in the discussion. Thank you, Adriana, for your comment. We are taking that into account to integrate that in a document of questions and answers, and all your comments will help to the final report that we will share with you. So we will begin this interactive exercise with you. If Monica, if you could please share the Jamboard screen. I am going to copy the link in the chat. As many of you know, you are already familiarized with this tool. Before we used to use the boxes. We used to, I'm not sure how you call it in Colombia. Every country calls it differently. So we all put our poses in regarding depending on any question or comment. So we will have these three questions. The first one is about this restoration priority map. What is useful from the map? What do you think is lacking or it is not present here? What everything that you were commenting in the chat, we could you can include it here. And in the left bar, maybe Monica can help me here. On the left side, you can click on the bar and you can write there any message. And from there, we have the second question that is inviting you to use applications and uses that the map gives you about restoration. There are several topics around that that we can include as well. And the third question is about which key actors should be involved in the next steps. What should the next steps imply? For example, regarding this topic about restoration costs and what actions it involves. So we could put that there, like which actors we could involve for that exercise. So we will have that in the Jamboard. opened. You can also have it in your computer, and Liliana will also have it. I am also going to take note of this. And in the meantime, Oscar can present us the priority areas map to be restored, the areas to be restored, so we can continue taking notes about these three questions in case we have space to solve any of them. And after the Oscar's exposition, we could come back to our Jamboard. It will have many comments, I hope. While in the meantime, let's listen to Oscar.
Okay, thank you, Cassandra. So yes, as Cassandra requested, please feel free to navigate to that link and start to add any comments for discussion you might have. But for the next, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to be showing you some of those output maps that were on my slides, but now we can look in a little bit more detail. So the platform I'm using here is the UN Biodiversity Lab. It's a web-based GIS platform with private workspaces for countries. And Dijang at the end of today's session will present this in more detail, so I won't say much. What we've got here is in this workspace I have, we've uploaded the key maps, the output maps that were in my presentations. So this first map now that you're seeing is the base map of restoration priorities to achieve 30% protection of degraded areas, or 15% protected of Colombia's total land area. And again, like I showed you in the slides, the restoration is distributed across many areas of Colombia, but still only in places that have been degraded. So this is our baseline scenario, and you can see we can zoom in to different parts of the map. I'm going to see if I can, sorry, just going to just put satellite on for a moment here. And we can see the places that are being identified now as priorities for restoration. So this is the baseline map, the main one that we're going to be producing from all this work. And I'll ask in the audience if there's anybody who would like me to pan to view any particular part of the country that's being identified for restoration priorities. We could take a closer look. So you can see when I'm zoomed out to a coarser resolution, because of how this displays the data, really you got to drill down into particular places to see the detail. Things get summarized up a little bit through a tiling process at the coarser resolutions. Can you let me know, will the UNBL link with these data be available to participants after this session?
Yes, we can provide these links, but for participants who want to view these data, they still need access to this workspace first, but I will provide a way to apply these access in my presentation later.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you.
So we're just looking here, but you're welcome to guide me to any place you'd like me to show you. But otherwise, as Dee said, she'll be sharing the ability for you to enter this platform and view the data yourself. So you can see here important river areas being identified as priorities for restoration within this farming landscape here, just to the west of the Andes.
Sí, Oscar, tenemos que nos solicitan aquí, nos solicitan.
Yes, Oscar, they are requesting to access the Tolima area. If you could please, if Jorge Enrique could guide us so we can know how to get to that area. A little bit down.
Más al sur.
Locate yourself in Bogotá, and then where it says Ibagué on the left. It's over there. Thank you, Jorge.
Perfecto.
Perfect. Yes, Stephanie, after the presentation of this exercise, we will have the presentation of D, or the intervention of D, who will explain how we can access to this private space of the to see the maps. Thank you, Stefania. We have got close to this zone.
Am I where you'd like to be, or do you want me to pan in any direction?
Un poco más abajo.
A little bit down.
Sí.
Un poquito más abajo.
A little bit down, please. It's down to the left. It said Villa Finca, like a part of the Tolima. They also called it Alpujarra or Dolores, Tolima. So there we are in the zone that you wanted to visualize, right, Jorge? Yes, those are like the degraded areas, like dry areas, like Atagaima and Coyaima, Ortega, and all the neighboring places. Yes, we are in the place that you want to see, Oscar. Yes, in order to progress. Yes, maybe to reduce a little bit the size of the map so we can see it better. Exactly. I think Ibagué is upper, and there the entire department is just there.
Okay, I think we've navigated to that. Thank you. I hope you're seeing
Okay.
what you were expecting to
So
see.
I think we are.
Sorry, I was hearing a translation. Was somebody asking a question? No, okay.
No, tenemos otras zonas también que quisieran enfocar.
No, there are also other areas, but maybe for this area, if you could explain what they are seeing now.
Yes, sorry, I just panned out, but what you see here is while we're seeing the Google Earth imagery of the country underneath, but the orange areas are places which were identified as priorities for restoration to achieve the 30% restoration of degraded areas. So this is the priority map. Now I'm just going to click on. Remember, we did two other versions, one which identified priorities that minimize conflict with agriculture, and a third one that minimize risks from climate change. So while we stay in this focal area, I'll flick on those other versions and we'll see how priorities shift. So right now in brown, it's loading the shift in priorities under the scenario where we try and avoid conflict with agriculture. So you've got two scenarios, both are optimization of achieving the area target for restoration, but one is a baseline scenario. The second in brown now scenario which avoids conflict with agriculture. You can see quite a shift in priorities here. And then I'll flick on even one more map, which includes avoiding risks from climate change, and in blue. So you can see the priority map really shifts when we start considering these other aspects, which are, I think, quite important for restoration. How much is it going to cost? Does it conflict with food security? What about climate risks? So I think that this is almost one of the most important findings from the work, is how much the restoration priorities change, whether we're considering conflict with agriculture and whether we're considering risks from climate. So I'll go back. This is the baseline scenario of restoration priorities. But those priorities change quite a lot if we consider agricultural opportunity cost. And then again, they change quite significantly. Sorry, we're having trouble loading here. Maybe I'll zoom in and out. They change significantly when you're considering climate risks as well. So I think this is really important moving forward as discussions for implementation, and maybe it's a really nice transition to some feedback on those post-it notes. Obviously, this is a very ambitious target for restoration. So as programs roll out to restore ecosystems in Colombia, one way to look at these different scenarios is to maybe do one more analysis to overlap all three of these, and to try and find the places that are being identified in a baseline scenario, but also being identified in a low agricultural cost scenario, and also being identified in the climate scenario. And places that are being identified in all scenarios, they might be the highest priority for the first actions for restoration. Before we move away from this viewer, I just want to show you the 3R map. I showed you this in my slides, but it was kind of hard to see. Again, the most common strategy being identified for Colombia is the recovery of ecosystems. So this is like kind of partial restoration, improving the function. But some places in purple here are being identified for rehabilitation. This is high level of restoration, but acknowledging that it might not be for the same species because climate's going to change quite a lot based on the modeling. And then in blue are places that are being identified for full ecological restoration to the original reference ecosystem. So you can see when we zoom into this map that the different strategies are sitting alongside each other depending on the state of the ecosystem and the projected climate change. So I realize we're only have about 35 minutes left of the session. So Cassandra, I'll ask you if you want to bring the screen back to the feedback slides before moving on to UNBL and the closing remarks.
Pierde cuidado, Oscar, que los slides de feedback en el Jamboard están siendo...
Yes, the slide backs are being filled while we look at the map, and we will go over them. But really, what you are showing us is really so powerful and so valuable. We really are being asked to zoom in on so many places. We cannot do it on all, but maybe I can tell you on some on them, because most people want to know how to get on this platform, and they mentioned the area of Ciénaga Gandre in Santa Marta. Maybe Liliana can help you on how to get on going up on north. Between Barranquillas and Santa Marta. Yeah, exactly there.
So we can see quite a diversity, particular around this mountainous area to the south southeast of Santa Marta, where it's some of the lower areas are being identified for recovery, potentially because they're more converted and be harder to fully restore. And then within the higher elevation places, we can see a mix of strategies of ecological restoration in blue, where full recovery to the original reference ecosystem is being identified, because climate change is not meant to push it to a different ecosystem. But in purple, some places climate change is projected to be so severe that restoring it to the original ecosystem might not be a good idea. And I might just flick on some of the other. So this is including agricultural opportunity cost. And wow, look at the difference here. So all this area between Barranquilla and Santa Maria, it's identified as a priority when we don't consider agricultural opportunity cost. But when we do consider agricultural opportunity cost, I guess because this is quite a productive and agriculturally suitable area, it's not being identified as a priority. So these are the tough questions then. Do you really not pursue restoration here because it should really focus on food production? And here I'll flick on under climate change. Let's see if the area, when we consider climate change, again, when we consider climate change, this region is not being identified because it's projected to have such a high climate velocity that it might risk the outcomes from the restoration projects. So I think that really, in a way, we've kind of opened up all the questions. We've brought all the data together. We've done sophisticated optimization, but we have quite diverse results here. We have diverse results in terms of the 3 Rs. We also have diverse results in terms of considering agricultural opportunity costs versus considering climate risk versus ignoring both. And it really changes the picture quite a bit. So really what would be fantastic is if this conversation continues forward in terms of how to interpret this and how to think about climate change, how to think about costs. Clearly, we haven't answered all those complex questions yet with these analyses.
Muchas gracias, Oscar. No sé si tuviéramos entonces.
Thank you, Oscar. Any other comments, questions about Oscar's presentation? We are short of time to go to specific places with this presentation. You will understand how to get onto this platform and do this analysis yourself, and you'll get all the documents. So if there are any other questions, if not, Oscar, I will give you the floor so as to finish your presentation. Then I will go to the Jamboard and will show all the answers about the ecological restoration map.
Okay, well, thank you, Cassandra. Really, to close out, I just want to thank everybody. This is quite a heavy session. We covered so many different, really micro topics or subtopics of restoration that really added to the layers of complexity for Colombia. So thanks so much, both for the original consultation where you gave us that feedback and that guidance that allowed us to unpack restoration to this much deeper level for Colombia, but then also staying with us today to hear about what we've done and then to view the maps and help us interpret them. So I really look forward to seeing your feedback in the feedback sessions before we have to close out the session. So yeah, thanks again. Fantastic experience working with all of you. Absolute pleasure.
Muchísimas gracias a ti, Oscar.
Thank you, Oscar. Now, Monica, can you help me with sharing the Jamboard? We have filled it up with data. Thank you for all your feedback about what's useful, what is missing in the map, what we can improve on, specifically about what is needed in the final report that will deliver. We are being told, for instance, for some areas that have already been restored, we will see that with the D in the next presentation, whether it's useful for the decision making, if it's useful to identify and filter areas, to have information at country level. That's what many of you say that's useful for decision making. The next question is for application and uses of the priority restoration map. This exercise is perhaps the analysis of environmental market. This is related to something that was mentioned. This was also related to the 3 R's of restoration, rehabilitation, and recovery. We should, yes, compare this with the agricultural map. And the last question is about the key actors and stakeholders to be involved in the next steps. The National Aqueducts Network and several stakeholders of civil society. It's important to engage them. This link will be active during the next day so that our colleague Liliana, who is updating everything for this workshop, she will update. Thank you. This has been a very active exercise, and before finishing this consultation, we wanted to show you this tool. Maybe some of you already know this online portal that gives you access to world data, national data too, and analysis tool to give you support for decision making about biodiversity, sustainable development, and biodiversity. Monica is now copying the links. Of the UN Biodiversity Lab. There are lots of functionalities there, but today we will focus on two, on restoration gathering and the private space for Colombia. D will show you how to access, how to download maps and all the details that you are so interested in. We are listening to you. We don't need to run. We are okay with time, so we are listening to you. D.
Thank you, Cassandra. It's really impressive to see how engaged you are today. And thank you so much for all the input and questions that help us improve the mapping and the analysis of this project. Okay, so thanks to Oscar's magnificent demonstration of UNBL in the map introduction, I think that triggered a lot of your interest in knowing more about this this mapping platform. So in this restoration project, beside the result maps and the report analysis, we also provide you this interactive map platform to view and download these layers online. And that's the platform called the UN Biodiversity Lab. So next, I will briefly introduce this platform to help you get started on navigating these spatial layers. We shall start with what is UN Biodiversity Lab. It is a UN level free open source platform with many of the best available global spatial data sets in biodiversity, climate change, and sustainable development. It doesn't require GIS expertise to use, and we created this platform to support policymakers, users, and countries all over the world with the resource to access spatial data and use them to strengthen their capacity in conserving and sustaining nature for people, climate, and planet. The initial version of UN Biodiversity Lab was created 5 years ago, specifically to support parties in their commitments to the CBD, with a focus on the 6th national report to the convention. With the initial launch of the platform, we challenged countries to double their number of maps used between the 5th national report and the 6th national report, and they succeed. So since then, UNBL has a long tradition of supporting parties in their commitment to CBD, now with a focus on the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We will continue to provide resources that can help countries adapt their national context, national commitments to support their commitments based on the existing capacity and needs. So now let's dive in with a short trailer about the UN Biodiversity Lab.
From the streets of New York City to the heart of the Amazon, maps help us understand how our changing planet is affecting our lives. Maps help us see where nature is thriving and where it is being destroyed. Spatial data help decision makers put nature at the heart of sustainable development by helping them identify essential ecosystems that help us secure water, feed more than 7 billion people, avoid natural disasters, keep carbon in the ground, and sustain more than 2 billion livelihoods. We, at the United Nations, together with our partners, are excited to launch the next iteration of the UN Biodiversity Lab. We have updated the UN Biodiversity Lab with new data and new functions to help decision makers put nature at the heart of development. To access more than 400 cutting-edge global data sets, including the world's first 10-meter resolution land cover and land use map. To explore popular data collections that unlock the power of data on key thematic issues and that provide insights on how and where action is needed most. To create a secure workspace where you can upload your own data to generate your own insights on the intersection of nature, climate, and sustainable development. To calculate dynamic indicators such as deforestation, showing the state of the planet at the click of a button. To generate your own powerful maps that can guide local and national action for nature, climate, and sustainable development. Powered by Microsoft's Planetary Computer and supported by more than 30 data providers, the UN Biodiversity Lab provides novel insight that is essential for putting nature at the heart of sustainable development. Our goal is to enable everyone to harness the power of data to equip policymakers with powerful tools to make more informed decisions on nature and to be able to monitor the pulse of our planet. Join us. Start exploring today at unbiodiversitylab.org.
All right, as covered in the trailer, there are 6 main features in UNBL, but in my introduction today, I will highlight the features that could support ecosystem restoration. Starting with global data, currently there are over 400 global data layers on biodiversity, carbon, sustainable development, and more than 70% of them are open access data that meet the standard of digital public goods. So you can explore, use, and download them freely on the platform. And when you click on any countries in the Place tab, the map will zoom to this country with a panel of summarized statistics based on 8 global indicators. For global data related to ecosystem restoration, we recently launched a restoration data collection. This collection provides a key resource for planners and decision makers to identify restoration needs and where to take actions. Here we categorize restoration into 3 distinct types, depending on the objectives and the trajectories of restored ecosystems. As on the right side of my slide, this includes to restore